Way over here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the, let's see, what is today? January 17th, Economic Development Committee meeting. It is really good to see all of you. And yeah, so let us begin today with our introductions. And I will start to my left, my far left.
Good afternoon. My name is Lee Altman, County Commissioner serving at large.
Good afternoon, I'm Laura Meyer, and I serve District 5.
Good afternoon, Mark Terrell, District 4.
All right, and I am Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell, elected by the people of District 6. So first of all, as always, we want to, I want to take a moment to make sure that everyone has had a chance to review our minutes, and I'll be waiting for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Oh my gosh, y'all. Somehow I have forgotten that there's other people in the room. And I apologize greatly for that. And really, it's because I don't have a script. And so I was just flying by the seat of my pants. So I do not have one, and I apologize for forgetting to introduce everyone in the room. So let's start here with our director.
Roger Johnson, Economic Development.
Shahid Rana, Economic Development.
Whitley, Economic Development.
Megan Witt, Economic Development.
Janoria Davis, Economic Development.
Clay Andrews, Economic Development.
Agustin Velasquez, Economic Development.
And Leslie Johnson, Deputy County Manager.
Fantastic. And do we have folks online?
Yes, online, we have Timothy Tibbs with the manager's office, John Walton with economic development, Brett Clampett with public information, and we have a few guests online. We have Alex Sands. We also have a number online ending in 9205. So if you would like to introduce yourself. If you can hear us.
Can the call-in person identify themselves so that we can have a record of your presence for our minutes? Okay. Well, if you are able to put it in the chat, put your name in the chat, that would also be helpful. So thank you very much for reminding me about the introductions, y'all. I'm sorry, I don't have a script, so just, no, that's okay. That's okay. We will go into the minutes then, approval of the minutes from the December 5th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All right, let's take a vote. Everyone in favor of approving the December 5th meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, that is unanimous. And I'm really excited about our item on the agenda today. And so, because I think this is, it's always good to have a refresher and, to hear about some of our tools that we use in economic development. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy County Manager Leslie Johnson to introduce this topic.
Awesome, thank you. As you noted, this is one of the tools that we have in our toolkit for economic development. It's called synthetic tax increment financing, or sometimes you hear us also reference it as tax increment grants. You may have a familiarity. We may have used a tax increment grant for like the Atrium project, and there's several different projects that we've used in Ballantyne Reimagine and like. What we wanted to do is, again, give another introductory overview of it, because we're getting ready to bring a few more before you and want to make sure you have a good footing and understanding of it and the benefits of it before we start introducing other types of projects for your behalf. The person who'll take the lead on that is the Economic Development Director, Roger Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. If you pull that up for me, please. While this presentation gets pulled up, I will mention that I introduced the term synthetic TIFs instead of TIGs. And I did that based off of my experience using terms that for the general public that are different. Oftentimes the general public think of grants as we'll give you money to do something. And I'd like to make sure that this is known as tax increment financing, where the developer and or our partner must perform, and then they get the grant. It's important in terms of the eyes of the community. I don't know how many times I've heard in my history that why are elected officials giving my tax dollars to developers when that is not in fact the case. It is a financing tool where the developer uses their incremental taxes to pay for a project. So I'm introducing a new vernacular. It's in economic development as TIGs, tax increment grants, and you've already approved to some degree the 2.0 and aware of what's going on. But mostly I wanted to share with you some ways that other communities in which I've worked have used synthetic TIFs to solve problems that go beyond just infrastructure issues. And then talk about how you as elected officials may choose to use this tool in the future, should it meet your desires. So, yeah.
Before Roger switches and starts going in, and then where we're seeing the opportunity is, as you may recall, in Economic Development 2.0, we've been conversing about being more intentional and collaborative with our town partners and trying to be intentional about economic development and growth and aligning our partnership with their interests, what they may have as their priorities. And some of that conversation is starting to identify strategic solutions for them to make things happen in their community. And so this may be a tool that we may need to leverage in order to help these other communities as well.
That's an excellent segue. I'll just add that we've already began those conversations with town leaderships and town managers. And in often times they have small area plans or downtown development plans or comprehensive plans where they want specific things built. But because of the cost of capital today, with both the borrowing capacity as well as the cost of construction, as well as other issues standing in the way of development, means there's a gap between the amount of available financing and what the community wants built. So that gap financing can also be sometimes closed by using tax increment financing to build what the community wants, including the public elements. But I'll get into that a little bit later if there's questions associated with it. Here's sort of the agenda of what we want to talk about. As I mentioned before, we're ready to operationalize the Strategic Plan 2.0, listed as TIGs. And we'd like for this group to consider tax increment financing for other public benefits, not just for infrastructure and placemaking. And I've got a couple of examples of what we mean by that, of things we've done in other communities. The first one I'll start with is in Wilmington, North Carolina. What you see here is a dilapidated parking deck, probably about 10 years ago. That particular deck had to be seen as viable by an engineering firm. You have to go check these parking decks every so often. There was too much vibration in the deck. There was cracks in the cement, and the engineering firm said, well, you can either raise the deck and build a new one, or alternatively, you can spend about $5 million to upfit it and extend its useful life for about 10 years. Well, we decided to go a different route, and we decided to use that particular location to turn that deck into more than just a parking structure. And I don't know if you can see it sort of hidden right here, but that is the parking deck itself. It is now wrapped by condos and commercial on the ground floor. You will see that 2 new towers of housing have been built, and including some commercial space along this area. The tax increment financing was used to rebuild the deck, create a new walkway that connected Front Street to River Street, and create a public plaza. So this was an opportunity to turn what was really a liability in the community using tax increment financing to turn it into something favorable that the community wanted. In complete candor, it was not unanimous by all in the community. Some people wanted a complete park there. Others wanted nothing but development there. But what we did is try to find the overlapping areas where the community had the most consensus. And this is what we built. And we turned an eyesore into an opportunity. So that's an example that is how you can use tax increment financing to influence the built environment and what the future looks like. Also in Wilmington, North Carolina, this is the Cape Fear River. We had an existing agreement with a developer. This was a brownfield area. And the basic agreement said, hey, if you'll build some things along the riverfront, build certain infrastructure, the roads and so forth, we will take ownership of that those particular roads, those streets, the streetscape, and maintain that for you. And this was in the 2008-9 timeframe. Well, that's when the housing market crashed. That's where developer, he was the biggest developer of homes in Colorado. He comes to the city and says, hey, I'm not so sure I'm gonna be able to build out my portion. I am financially strapped. Can you help? So we entered into a note agreement to purchase additional land, which you'll see here, but we also entered a TIF to build build out the entire riverfront, as well as create some public bathrooms and do some other things that I'm about to show you. And that tax increment financing for Marina, there's a hotel here and a couple of restaurants, was used to build public infrastructure that would not have existed otherwise. And so what you see today is the amphitheater that was built there. This is what it looks like at a concert down on the riverfront at night. Here's the two restaurants that I mentioned, and you can see the marina. I just wanted to, I know these are great pictures, but I'm saying more than just the pretty pictures. There's an opportunity to use tax increment financing for other things than just building streets or having infrastructure or other types of opportunities. When I was in Albemarle County in Charlottesville, there was an existing building. It's a historic building called Woolen Mills. You can see the broken windows. There's literally trees growing through the middle of the structure itself. The developer had purchased that and he was going to build housing there. He was going to turn it into a combination of condos and or other types of housing. And we had a company called Willow Tree that was thinking of relocating. And so in order to find a home for Willow Tree, they were considering Boulder, Colorado and Durham. We had to find a way to make it affordable for them to be there. So we entered into a public-private partnership to turn what would have been a housing project into a space for an existing company that we did not want to leave. And now you can see where the trees were growing, how well that looks on the inside. And this is also on the outside. In fairness, we use tax increment financing to close the gap between what the developer would have made for a housing project to what he made in terms of leasing space to an existing corporate citizen. It's a little more complicated than I made it sound, to be honest with you. There was oftentimes 6 months to a year of negotiation. It included other infrastructure investments, but in all three cases, we used tax increment financing to solve a problem and keep a development moving forward for the good of the community. So those are three examples to solve three different problems using tax increment financing. And then I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Director Shaw to talk about another example.
Thank you, Roger. I thought I heard Deputy County Manager. I was like, promotion on the way.
You just got promoted.
All right, well, I wanted to show you an example of my work in Camden, New Jersey. To the left, you'll see that underutilized parking lot here on the waterfront. And what we did was provide some tax increment financing for a business attraction opportunity. And that opportunity became the Philadelphia 76ers headquarters and practice facility. And it was also a combination of consolidating the New Jersey Devils in that facility as well. They were part of the same ownership. So this was one of the first business attraction deals that I did in my career. And it happened to be with a professional sports team. But one of the unique opportunities that was here was a small business innovation center that was a part of their headquarters, where fast growing startups had the opportunity to get access to capital from the minority ownership team of the Philadelphia 76ers and the actual basketball players. So this was a high growth opportunity for small businesses. It was something done that was very innovative that a lot of sports teams didn't necessarily do before. Typically, your minority ownership is concerned about their net operating income and their overall return on investment from the team franchise itself. But what the 76ers did was really bridge the gap with the small business and innovation community, provided a space in an incubator in which we were also a part of that as well. In addition to, there was a local minority hiring goal in regards to the construction and facilities maintenance as well, in addition to the community usage for the facility. So when you think about basketball teams, community centers having community engagement days, they really opened up their doors for these facilities, and then a host of other opportunities that were done in tandem with the city of Camden to promote that facility, team engagement, and to provide access to high-level facilities for the small business community.
So I know that it was roughly a year ago that you've seen a presentation on tax increment grants. I know that we're regurgitating some information that you may already be cognizant of, but in this particular, is it changing itself? Okay, well, I'm gonna try to be quickly. This is where if blank parcel worth 1 million, it's automatically transferred. That's not me, I promise. You build something that's now worth 101 million, it generates $616,000 in tax increment. You can use that monies and rebate a portion of it to pay for infrastructure gaps. It's automatically got something associated with it to overcome a gap financing of $4.3 million. So that is in combination with the city in that particular example. So what does that mean to us? If we just kept the parcel blank today, the county would, I promise you, I'm not doing that. Would get $6,169 annually. If you build something as $100 million, we get $616,000 or approximately annually. If we rebated taxes of 45% to fix the tax, the gap that was articulated on the screen earlier. I'm not sure what's
Gotta
happening.
really pay attention.
I'm trying. I promise.
Gotta get it
Slide here.
real fast.
Yeah, can you just hold it? Can you go back a slide and slow down and get it just, it is not, it's automatic.
So I'm manually going, stay on this
Go,
side.
no, sir, go back if you would.
This
So
one?
yes, sir, and just hold right there. So in the previous example, there was a gap financing that needed to happen to build the structure of a little over 4.3 million. One way you could fill that gap so they could build that is through tax increment financing. They build it, we rebate the taxes over a 10-year period. They would get, the developer would be rebated 2.7 million from the county, 1.5 from the city, filling the gap that they needed to close the deal of $4.3 million. If that scenario happened, if you would transfer it, if we did nothing, the county would get a little over $6,000 annually. When the development is built out, we get about $616,000 annually in tax revenue. Of course, in the scenario we gave, we rebated $277,000 annually. So for the first 10 years, it would only increase our coffers by $339,000 annually. But after 10 years, it would be $616,000 in perpetuity. We didn't put in CPI escalators. We didn't put in all those things to project, but just as a basic example of why you can use tax increment financing to get something built and increase revenues so you can accomplish other goals for whether it be affordable housing, whether it be homelessness and so forth. We're growing the pie to give you additional tools to help accomplish those goals.
As Roger switching, I think the other thing that's important to take note of is that so often we have developers come to the county and say, oh, I have this gap financing. What we're trying to do is, while that's a good thing to happen, how can we be more proactive with our local jurisdiction partners and be more intentional about what we individually as jurisdictions or collectively want to happen in a community, and bring the developers and the tools to the table instead of the reverse where they're driving us, we're trying to drive them a little bit. Does that make sense?
That's a good question.
Sure.
Like just right here, thank you. Like, will you back one slide? How is this different, the TIF? How's it different than what I think, than what we did with the med school? Because this feels, yeah, this feels like exactly.
It's really,
So the nomenclature is just, it's just different nomenclature for the.
he's
exact
using a
same
different,
model?
and that's what he was trying to share early on, was that so often in Mecklenburg County in the city, we have used traditionally the tax increment grant. And for some people, the word grant at the end, meaning the public at large, it makes it more confusing for them. So in the industry, the synthetic tax financing is a nomenclature that is used for one and the same. So it's one and the same. The only other difference I would say is we, more often than not, it still has to have a public benefit of what we're gaining out of it. However, our contributions to do the gap financing for the Innovation District, Atrium, this medical school, that really is all infrastructure, right? Parking deck, and the city gets roads. That's what we're, parking deck and roads. And the parking deck is valuable for park and rec because we have events sometimes there and we need that parking deck to help augment that. But that's what we're gaining. What the team is trying to say, as well as myself, there are more public benefits versus just roads, parking decks, and parks. And we may need to be more intentional and strategic in planning on what we may want in communities. and try to leverage this tool to get what we want in our communities. And Roger already indicated possibly not for placemaking, but one of the earlier conversations like Shaw and I were having, there's a lot of parts of the community, well, South End, developers are gonna go to South End, right? They're going to South End. There may be some corridors or pockets in our community and developers aren't going there yet. But yet you and I know something needs to be happen and be activated there. And do we lose these tools to be more strategic to shape what we want there versus being driven the other way? So that's kind of how but with regards to nomenclature, it's the same.
Yeah, I'm asking us to change it to tax increment financing from tax increment grants. And I think that my experience has shown me that people don't fully understand that in the public, that it's really a financing tool. They hear grants and it feels like we're giving them money, corporate welfare, and that is not in
Right.
fact the case. We're getting a public benefit using their own tax dollars or private sector dollars.
But what about the word synthetic? That seems.
Yeah,
unnecessarily
tax
confusing.
increment financing itself is under North Carolina general statute, has its own term. You draw an area around a boundary and you tax that whole district and they get additional services. That's tax increment financing under the way a municipal service district, a business improvement district, or other types of things. Synthetic TIF is just related to the project itself. It's self-financing. It's not a specific agreed to area where you get additional services. It is the financing tool itself. In fact, some communities use general obligation bonds, borrow the money, and I'm not saying we do that, but I'm just using it as an example, and use the future revenues to pay off the general obligation bond.
But if we're trying to like choose helpful nomenclature, synthetic, it seems not helpful.
Okay.
Like, what does that actually mean? Like, why is that word being used here?
The way the risk is shared in a true TIF, the county issues bonds. The county goes to the market, they create the financing mechanisms and they bear the risk associated with that. In a synthetic TIF, you let the developer do that. The developer builds the project, shoulders the risk, and we reimburse them after they pay us. So it's a little bit of a twist on what is traditionally known as tax increment financing, because we're not issuing bonds, we're not shouldering the risk of having to repay it and the debt for that. The developer is. So it's kind of a synthetic version. It's our own version of that.
So it sounds like we've only been doing synthetic versions, except with CMS where we're putting a bond out there.
Right.
Yes and no. So the one that I would reference that was one for the district that Roger was referencing would have been First Ward Park. That tax increment grant was not just for the actual site, but it was a boundary that went beyond that site for influence of development. It was if you do this, others will come. And then you'll see the benefit of other tax value that goes around a perimeter. And that did start playing itself out. And so that model was a little bit different, but.
So to your point, Commissioner Allen, these, and what Clay responded to, the developer assumes the risk in this scenario. They build all the infrastructure and then we reimburse them for that. We're not paying for the parking deck or the affordable housing or whatever park or whatever element you want in there as a local government. They're assuming all the financial risk associated with it. I think Dr. Johnson mentioned this, we can influence the development. Obviously, the market's going to dictate what the private sector wants to build, but thank you. We can influence that. We can use private investment to create a public benefit. We don't have to go using our own money, if you will. We talked about how we can help solve some community issues. We can talk about affordable housing or other types of career resource centers. But if you wanted to satellite police officers, whatever the community may need, you can use this tool to help include those in the private sector built environment. It increases the tax revenue, creates jobs. It ensures a higher and better use for the property. Oftentimes, the developer is limited by their access to capital, so they don't reach the highest and best use for that particular property. We can utilize MWSB subs. We can use it to reduce blight. I think this is what Dr. Johnson was mentioning, maybe on the east side and the west side, where there's corridors of opportunity. If we wanted to catalyze development, we could perhaps use this tool to do something of that nature, to catalyze new growth in those areas. And then I'm gonna lessons opportunity cost. There are often times where projects sit on the shelf until sometimes they never get built, or they wait till market conditions change. An example would be Barnes Lumber in in Crozet where I worked before that, that project sat on the books for 15 years, ready to be built, but the finances never met because the community wanted, grid, public park, complete streets, and it never became such that the investors and or the developer could turn a profit and build all of those things in the community. So the local government had to put their finger on the scale and say, okay, we'll pay for the roads, we'll pay for an urban park, and if you will go ahead and build it, but with these particular conditions. So sometimes a project moves forward that wouldn't move forward otherwise. So those are reasons why you may choose to do these as just examples. There are many more that may be of interest to you. We just wanted to introduce this topic and talk to you at some point about current opportunities that will be coming your way. So this is as much a precursor for some future conversations.
All right, great. So can you put it back on that last slide, just as we have discussion that might help people, just to be able to refer to it. So does anyone want to start with questions? Yep. Okay, Commissioner Jarrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think this is a fantastic presentation. It's a great way to start out 2024. I am glad that we're changing the nomenclature. I've been guilty in my mind when we say TIG. I personally am guilty of this thought in my mind. We could do this for larger organizations, grant, i.e. grant, not looking at it in terms of financing, which it truly is. So this is really helpful, and I think it'll help me with my conversations in the community, number one. When we look at additional benefits, I'm also wondering if this gives us an opportunity. Obviously, we are focused on economic mobility in the Crescent, or economic opportunity, excuse me, in the Crescent in particular. And so does this give smaller developers, minority developers, women, who usually do not get too many opportunities to get into the game, but have a vested stake and interest in those communities and understand what the need is or have some level of historical context? I'm wondering if that is an additional item that would be placed on that
So
list.
I'll chime in. So I'll use, we have done one for midsize, and that would be the Bobby Drakeford one off of Statesville Avenue.
Statesville. Mhm.
Okay, so yes, the tool can be used in those. The increment still, don't forget, has to be, the value has to increase for us to get that increment of tax. So when you do something in Uptown, that tax value is going to have a different exponential than if you do something in another part, in some other parts of the community.
Understood.
Notwithstanding that, the answer is yes. It is a tool that can be used for small, medium, or large size developers, but we still have to ensure that you get the tax increment, that growth and that value and the net of that. So one of the things, like when we had the Draper, when we had to try to make sure that the development and what was going to happen, the change of value was really going to occur, even though it's a smaller size development.
So to that point, I just have two other things that I wanted to discuss, and that one is that point. Because these areas are not going to see the same level of value, it's impossible to meet that threshold for most of the development where it's needed the most. So I would really like to understand at a later date and time, there has to be another tool that we can use for those specific areas so that those smaller developers can get in the game who have that vested interest in the community to be able to develop, because it is not always going to meet the threshold. That one on Statesville just happens to be around Camp North End, and so Bobby was able to kind of meet it, and you helped, obviously. So at some point, I would really like to get a better understanding on that. The last thing I wanted to ask is this: how do we determine what our capacity is with respect to TIFs? Like, what does that look like? Because I don't have a good idea to understand what respect to the capacity.
Capacity in terms of our team?
Well,
in
no,
order
I'm
to carry
sorry.
that
I'll
out, or
try
do
to
you mean
answer.
capacity in terms
I'll
of
try
the-
to answer it and somebody else can kind of chime in, right? They're project by project. Well, so let's go. There's two things that I will share. In some instances, as Roger gave it an example, development may not occur And so you're just going to get whatever's the natural change in value for growth without having the collaboration or partnership with the tax increment financing. So by doing this, you are being a catalyst for your tax values to increase because it's going to be development. Notwithstanding that, we have an opportunity. We don't get them that often, but if we start putting more projects on the forefront, we do have to do a very good analysis to help you as a committee as well as the board understand, have we reached our capacity for what we should be doing in this space, that you're not hindering other things from funding for other things because but remember, this is but for, if we wouldn't put the financing here, you wouldn't have any growth in the revenue from these projects. So we have to be, that's what I'm saying, we want to be more intentional and drive what we are recommending as not saying that we can't still take other interested parties coming to us, but if we're driving it, we know that this is an area that probably wouldn't have been touched any other kind of way. And my philosophy, and it's supported academically, is government stands in when the private sector does not, right? That's just the basics of economics. Government comes in and provides programs and structures and things. When it doesn't happen, it fails in the natural market. And so that's what we're trying to say, where are these areas that we know that are very intentional that need it, and should we invest in it? But yet, you're right, we definitely need to do and be intentional about modeling and seeing that we haven't exceeded our capacity, that we can't do other programmatic things because we've chosen not to get revenue for 5 or 10 years in order to pay this off, or a smaller scale of revenue. But remember, the revenue would never happen. But
it's almost like a chicken and egg,
Correct.
Kind of
Correct.
dance there. But, and then if at some point we could circle back, Madam Chair, if you deem it appropriate, to maybe look at other tools that may be available to come back that we can discuss here that meet that criteria in areas that don't increase in value as much as South Charlotte, let's say,
Yeah.
or some other areas.
The
Right.
one other
What
thing I'll
could we
say,
do?
and Roger,
How
it
does
looks
that
like he has some
work?
ideas as well, is
Yeah.
that we may find ourselves having to do multiple, right now, we tend to do one tool per project and concept, right? We may find that we may have to use this tool and another tool, and the combined tool helps that. But I don't know, we have to kind of, and they have way more seasoned expertise in different types of examples that we can show how it can work. But Roger, I'll defer to you as well.
The Cliff Notes is it usually requires site ownership to get to the level you're talking about. And I'll be happy to come back at another time and talk to you what my experience has been and what other communities are doing to address the issues you're talking about, Commissioner.
Thank you. I
Yes, sir.
appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, awesome discussion. Commissioner Meyer, Commissioner Altman? No, okay. Well, I just want to understand, are you saying that you would have RFPs to try to spur certain kinds of developments that you want, or?
The example in Wilmington that I showed you was a city-owned property. So they were the administrator of the RFP. They said you must build commercial on the ground floor. You must build 468 parking spaces. 178 of those must be public. You must give us some sort of fee for the air rights above to build above. And and in doing so, we'll make some certain concessions, larger building heights and the like. And so there were 8 respondents who said, we would love to build on your riverfront. This is what we will build. It went through a public process where the elected officials chose the developer of choice based off a combination of some vetting that we did, the vetting of the architect and engineering firm, the vetting of the capacity of the people to have the financing to build something of this nature. And then just what I'll just call a general background check to make sure we're working with good partners. We wouldn't want to put you in a position where you find out you're dealing with a shady character, for lack of a better term. And after we did all of those things, the board decided, and then there was 6 months of rights to negotiate first. That developer ended up building what you saw on that screen. So what I explained to you was about a 2-year process. I explained in about 30 seconds. And so that project took about 6 years to go from that parking deck that you saw that was dilapidated till the time it was finished. And that did include an RFI. If it's owned by the private sector, which I promise you we're going to talk about at some point, it's a different scenario.
Okay, so that was not owned in the private sector, of course. All right. So I guess the reason I'm asking that is because this would say, that really leads me to the question of, this is only for land that we own?
No,
No.
ma'am. There are other private sector folks who would love for us to be party
Do this,
to
right, of course.
projects.
Right.
And so we would have the ability to go in and negotiate for some of those things that we talked about.
Okay, I think the confusion or the question that I'm having is, are we talking about being more proactive in how we want to see development happen?
Yes.
Yes.
And is, if, you know, and are we going to go out there and say, we want to see this, and which is basically an RFP, right? You know, tell us, you know,
In some instances, yes. In some instances, yes, right?
but how do we do that with someone else's land? You know, that's,
Well.
I'm happy to answer that question.
Go ahead.
We get involved at the conceptual design phase where we speak to the particular developers and or investors and say, if you would like the county or city to participate,
Okay.
you must include these public elements. And we would have stated goals around the community of what we're trying to accomplish. And it would be a sort of a quid pro quo, if you would. If you build this, you are eligible for that.
okay, so what we sort of want to do is kind of put the word out to folks and be like, hey, the county's open for business. And, you know.
And some
like,
know,
come
and
to us
some of
with
us
your
know.
ideas.
Some of them know, some know, and they're coming to us and, you know, and more than your traditional ones. And the team, like I said, we foresee more coming because as affordability is becoming more challenging in our community, developers are trying to find ways as well. And so even on that proactive, they're trying to find opportunities to bridge their gap. If it's in parts of areas that we're very interested in, then we need to make sure that we get what we want out of it too. So we get that win for the public benefit. And so it's being more strategic in the ask and the like. So it's a combination of things.
Okay, and that all sounds great. So I want to go to the other side of the coin a little bit here and just talk me through the idea of creating a windfall for someone by using this public tool. So, you know, we make you a millionaire. We make you a billionaire by providing this tool for you. Is that okay with
Well-
us? Or can I just finish my, you know, is there a way to, like, one of the things that comes to my mind is like the NOAAs, like the NOAA that we're going to have today, where those investors take a certain amount of profit, right? And the rest of it, you know, like they know they're going to take less profit than they would if they were investing in some other project. So my question is, is there a way that we could balance out and be like, okay, if we want to do this together, how can, you know, we want you to, you know, obviously make money. That's what you are in the business of doing. But I also feel a little something about making millionaires out of people using public tools.
Very fair question. There are a couple of standard measurements that these developers use to determine the value of a property. One of them is called internal rate of return, and those yield on cost. There are generally accepted standards for what those may be. It's about 16% for most projects, or about 6% on yield on cost. As part of the evaluation for that particular project, we would make sure that they were making a reasonable rate of return and we were not padding the linings of already rich people. The other thing that we do is we would investigate who are the investors, which oftentimes are real estate investment trusts, which are, you know, comes from money from teachers unions or firefighters unions or other types of things. So the people who are investing are getting a return on the investment by developing in this project and not making, I'm not gonna mention any names, but someone who's already wealthy.
That's what Ballantyne did. They really played up well, this is going to help the firefighters and the teachers and all that when they came to us.
But we can make
So-
sure that they're not making an absorbent amount of money or just making additional money off the project by looking at those two little those two primary measurements of
But
success.
what do you do with that? Like, so let's say you say, well, we want to make sure they're not making too much. Well, where does the,
We would
extra
negotiate what
go?
a reasonable rate of return would be with them.
and
As part of
then,
that
and then where does
Negotiation,
the,
it's the contract management, it's contract management and it's the execution of the contract. So it's the negotiations and you have to get it executed that way and then you got to manage to it.
so is there a potential that if it goes over the amount of the guaranteed or the, I don't know if it's guaranteed, but the rate of return that they would
It's all
agree
written,
to?
if it's in your, if we write that in the agreement, yes, it's no different than you you can structure it to where it'd be like a clawback or you, because you have to remember these tax increments, they're getting reimbursed in some instances, so, and over time. So you, if they, whatever the criteria, if they go tilt and go outside of the box in some way, you don't have to, that's, they don't get the money. So there's things that we could do structurally, but it does require contract management
Mhm.
to address those types of things.
Is
You
that,
can't just take, you just can't assume that you write it, they pay it and the like. So even different business incentive grants, when we're doing it for new jobs, they're checking to make sure they have the number of jobs they're taking. So there is a contract management that goes after y'all approve it, that has to go to that life of that contract
Mhm,
to ensure that we're getting what we asked to get
mhm,
in the process.
right,
But it's contract management.
okay. Does that, what I'm asking about, is that normal? Is that something that they would expect? Or is,
Absolutely.
it
Yeah,
is?
all of the grants are performance-based, and we can negotiate the terms in regards to return on investment. And then in regards to performance-based, if they don't meet the criteria set on the front end, they don't receive the grant. I'm going to use a bad example. We signed up and approved a BIP for Centene. They did not meet the hiring goals. They built the building. They did not receive a grant. We receive all of the tax revenue from that building. That's one example.
Mhm. So give me the reverse example where, you know, you have this river district, just, I mean, because this hasn't happened, but let's just say, let's just pretend.
We have had to do clawbacks, right? Where someone did not perform and they have to give us the money back or something like that. So there are instances where we've had, which we have a few, where we may have had to leverage the clawbacks. In some
Mhm. Right, but what I'm saying is the opposite. Let's say they're doing so great. We've made you a millionaire many times over. What's the part where the public gets more benefit? You don't just get all the benefit, that's
Our
above and
grants
beyond.
Our grants are not to exceed, and then they're percentage based. So if you make more money, you may actually capture the not to exceed amount of your grant in an earlier year of the term, in which then the grant is over. And then everything else extra we keep.
Okay, okay.
Or rather the financing.
So the future.
Correct.
Good catch.
Financing. Sorry, financing, that's correct. So if they exceed performance-wise, they achieve their financing at an earlier date in which the financing tool then expires,
Right,
and we receive all of the tax revenue from that project. And then quick timeout, we still have a closed session. I just want to be mindful
oh,
of
we do,
time.
oh,
Yeah.
how much, okay, okay, we're good. Okay, I'm still a little bit funky on this. And I do you guys have any feeling about that?
I do. I mean, I guess what I'm hearing from staff is like, we will always have contract provisions that ensure the profit margins we need. And if they trip over what they're, need to recoup, then they stop getting the benefit and that kind of thing. But what I hear you wanting to get to is income inequality.
Mhm.
And you don't want to participate, or the county to participate in making the rich richer. And I hear you, but I guess my thought about it is that, I am looking at what an entity can do to benefit this community. And I'm looking at what we can do to ensure we get 100% the value of our bargain and not $1 more than we negotiate on the front end. You know what I'm saying? But like,
Mhm.
to look at that actor and like have a different set of rules if they're already like deep pockets, like I just don't see us doing that. I don't think that should be, I don't know. I mean, I doubt that's legal. I doubt it's the kind of, just don't know. I mean, if I'm understanding the goal correctly, I'm not sure I'm driving with it because I don't even see how it would be feasible. And what I'm focused on is the benefit to the community where we negotiate the best deal on the front end. And that doesn't really look at who's on the other side of it. You know what I mean? As long as they
Yeah.
deliver the product like we all agreed they would, you know?
Mhm. I think the thing that I'm trying to get at is if the one side is going to get all of the, you know, a huge amount of benefit, like way more than what the public gets. It seems like there should be some way to reconcile that they don't get super heavy on the benefit and the county and the people get, well, that's all we asked for, because, you don't always know ahead of time that, this is going to turn into Park Avenue and it's going to make so much money for these guys. And all we asked for was a park, or, it's
So
like,
I
what
think
does,
that's a fair question, but has there ever
Closed session.
been? And
What?
would it be permissible to have, like, if it caps out over 300% of what the
Yeah,
anticipated
that-
revenue is?
right.
Then there's a profit sharing agreement. Is there such a thing as that? Because it's a,
I've never had that experience. I can't speak to that. We'll have to
Right.
do
I
some
don't think
research.
we've had one here locally that has been like that, but what I would say is a couple things. One, we've heard both perspectives, right? And I think it'd be project by project based. And when that type of project comes, you're going to be here, we're negotiating and trying to figure out what we should be doing to ensure for it, because as we get to the project by project. But what I'm hearing is that we will definitely ensure that we have that lens as we're sitting at the table and starting these conversations if they so happen. But, and be intentional, just like we've heard you before, like, or someone said, oh, do they do stuff for justice involved, or do they blah, blah, blah. So as we hear those types of perspectives, we bring them to the table as we're trying to negotiate and figure out what's the best project structure to bring before you. And so we commit to make that happen based on what we're hearing individually and collectively from you.
and let me just say, like, obviously, like, I too want to recoup as much as we can for the public, and I appreciate the goal. And if it can be achieved in a competitive market, like, amen, but if it cannot, I don't want us to sour on a good project like Atrium, where it's someone who's got deep pockets, if it's a great amenity for our community. That's my only thought.
all right, thank you.
And if this is wildly successful, as you say it is, tax values probably gonna go up pretty high. too.
Mhm.
So you've
Which
always
is a
gonna be-
benefit.
Always
right,
will
of course.
benefit, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, some folks are gonna get that way big benefit and I don't love that. I don't love, the idea of using public, it's one thing if you're doing that, hey, great. But if the public is giving you that leg up, but everybody else doesn't get to have a leg up, that just kind of, something about that rubs me in the wrong way. But anyways, okay, so it sounds like we probably should wrap this up and go on to our closed session. Do I hear a motion to go into closed session?
So
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. Aye. All right. Okay, and now it seems like we need another motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
All right, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
aye.
Aye. And that is unanimous.
What is that?
Of course.
Oh, so
at this.
so they have many different things, but
what I was